Zoel. She tries to energize the afternoon, especially if you had rice and curry or something else, then you might be struggling to keep awake. Huh? Now, we told ourselves, and those online as well, that we are a community that is a learning and reflecting community. While we are all staff who are busy doing and meeting our deadlines, we need to take time off to discuss, to hear, and so forth. So we have had some interesting presentations. So the other day when I was invited to this book launch, and when I came back, I mentioned to Zoel, we must get Ms. Shanthi over to talk to us, especially the younger staff, to understand the experiences of senior people in the field who have devoted a whole lifetime campaigning and strategizing on gender-related issues. Ms. Shanthi, I think I met her through the NGO movement, and I'm always conscious with Shanthi and Omna, if I make a wrong comment on gender or something, because both will hantam me, and which is fair, because we are all brought up in families that never took, the male boy in the house, never did any work, and so forth. But here we want to see how SDGs relate to gender issues, and that we all know that the SDGs are linked to human rights declarations and conventions. Now, many of us don't link it in our work or in our analysis, but the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination on Gender is critical to the SDG on women, children. We have CRC as well. But the link between SDGs and human rights conventions, most politicians play it down, most government agencies play it down. We ourselves are extremely weak on SDG 16. We are doing poverty, we are doing income generation, we are doing mobilizing and so forth. So Shanthi comes as someone who has devoted her lifetime in championing it, not just as an activist, but also being nominated by the Malaysian government to be on the CEDAW committee in Geneva. It's not an easy appointment, but to be in the CEDAW committee that then monitors other countries and so forth. So we then know there is a global standard setting, and that standard has a committee of people who will review all the countries regularly. And to have someone who has worked at that level in Geneva, because the Human Rights Council and all operate from Geneva, not from New York. So that experience, wealth of experience, she comes. So I thought it's important for younger staff who might not have the background, the expertise. Maybe you might want to go to Geneva sometime, but even if you don't go to Geneva, you can champion gender issues from SDGs, not forgetting CEDAW, which is a commitment that the government has made. So let's give a hand. Shanthi has the wealth of experience. She has been with the Alliance right from the beginning, in various meetings and so forth. She's also a member of the Society for the Promotion of SDGs. So I thought it is important for her through the My SDG Academy to present. This is being taped, and this will be kept as a learning module and so forth. And we got two of our local experts to also interact. When I came back I excitedly showed Ken this book. We need to raise our standard of publication to this level, and passed him the copy and asked him to read it. I see he has marked the book thoroughly, and he will speak, and Dr. Sue as well, to interact with this. And then we'll have a Q&A. I think we promised to keep it not too long, but this is a unique opportunity. Learning is asking questions. So I don't know whether James will give 100 ringgit to his staff who asks a question, or he'll buy a masala tea afterwards to you. So thank you very much for Shanthi to come to interact, and we can learn from her. Back to you.
Thank you. All right. So we have
Too loud.
Shut up, calm down. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, Dr.
Oh, Zoe.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me now? Thank you very much for inviting me to share my experiences and the writing of this book and what it contains. Before I start talking about the book, I want to say something about why this book is really organization is called Women's Rights Action for Asia and the Pacific. We are an international women's human rights organization. So people ask us, why do you call it Asia Pacific? It gives the impression that your work is in only Asia Pacific and not just global. So I said it was because of my experience that the international community, especially donors, European and everybody else, thought that anything coming out of the developing world, what we call the Global South, cannot do international human rights work. Where is your office? When I went for fun, they would ask me, where's your office? I said, we are based in Malaysia. Then they said, you're not international. And we have brought women from about 144 countries of the world into the international CEDAW review process in Geneva. But they said, you're not international. If your office is in London, New York, or Geneva, we will consider. So, because I want to establish that an organization based in the Global South will and can do international human rights work. So it's a very political stand for us, and we retain that Asia Pacific after saying International Women's Rights Action Watch, Asia Pacific. We keep that. So I just want to make that point very clear. Second point I want to say is the work that we did, and what this book talks a lot about, is also the use of international standards for the promotion and protection of women's human rights. In every country, there are programs for the promotion and protection of women's human rights, or even equality. But what is the standards that are used? How do they understand women's human rights? For example, when I was on the CEDAW committee and we are reviewing, governments are obligated to every 4 years after they have ratified, this is a treaty. The CEDAW is a treaty. And it's from there that you get the standards, the global standards for women's right to equality and non-discrimination. So having ratified or acceded to this treaty, governments have to be held accountable, and they come every 4 years and produce a report to this special expert committee. And there is this committee on which I sat. It's a compliance committee. So it reviews their reports. It receives alternative information from NGOs called shadow reports. And we review and give our conclusions. So when you sit there, you're reviewing every country by turn. So we have European countries and countries from Scandinavia, which are assessed to be the top of the scale where women enjoy equality. And these Scandinavian countries are like Finland, Norway, Sweden, Denmark. They're always in the global equality index, they come out on the top. But when we review them, we began to see that there wasn't that much, when it came to equality, there wasn't that much difference in the culture in which you valued women in your country. There wasn't. In terms of conditions of their life, women from very progressive, developed countries had better conditions, they had better health, they had better income, their living conditions was better. But actually, when it boiled down to how men and women valued in these countries, there wasn't any difference. And the women whom that we brought came from that women were being reviewed, and coming from both developed countries, developing countries. The women from the developing countries were quite shocked when they saw that there really, in terms of the culture, there was no difference. I want to tell you something. A Portuguese woman said this when she came to the review process. She said, despite economic, political, social, cultural, and linguistic differences, the main concerns among the NGOs from different parts of the world were absolutely transversal to all. We saw so much commonality. And Finland, and I was sitting on the committee when Finland, when there's a lot of violence against women in all these countries, Finland, Sweden, Denmark, everywhere. And the Finnish government was defending that culture of violence in their countries. And what they said, and I'm quoting to you again, state-created symmetry between different phenomena of violence by stating women are violent too. And here we are looking at violence against women perpetrated by men. And they said the Finland government said women are violent too. And the greatest problem in my country is violence between two males. The state obscures the gender-specific issues in violence. This is what we noticed, that culture in almost every country of the world. So this is a big eye-opener for those of us who are going into that level. What spurred me on was that CEDAW provides global universal standards, regardless of what the context is, whether you're a rich country or a poor country, or where your culture may be different in certain ways. And it is those standards that are important. Otherwise, your particularities, your way of thinking influences how you observe the phenomena of inequality and how you can even justify it. So this was something that spurred me on. And at the book launch at which Dr. Dennison was present, I spoke about what really inspired me to start this interest in equality of women and the standards through the CEDAW, the text and the treaty of the CEDAW. And that was, I was at that time doing some work with what was then called the Federation of Family Planning Associations. But it is today Federation of Family Health, Reproductive Health. It doesn't call itself family planning. But when I was working there, go into the clinics. We were running clinics and observe what was happening to women who came for acceptance of, for the receipt of course, they were coming for contraceptive services. And I was really shocked because the women who came into the clinics had no autonomy. They couldn't personally in their personal and intimate relationships. For example, they, many of them couldn't accept contraceptive services, making us through their own self-determination. They were forbidden to take contraceptives, either by their husbands or by their mother-in-law or somebody in the family. So they would come in a clandestine manner to get the contraceptives. I also observed that many of them are abused physically, sexually, but very badly sometimes. Wounded, sometimes physically and sexually. I was working there in the 1980s. At that time, we didn't have a domestic violence law. We didn't have. So there was no remedy. You couldn't go and complain anywhere that you were sexually or physically abused. The paramedics in the clinics were very sympathetic, very compassionate. They would comfort the women. They would treat them, give them medical attention for the injuries that they may have come in with. But there was nothing they could do more than that. And the women could neither when or whether to have children. Can I give you some water, please? Or when to have sex or whether to have sex. There was no decision making in their hands. So when I looked at this, I said, we needed something more than the laws that we have in the country or the policies we have in the country. And at that time, I came to know about CEDAW. And I said, gaining insights into the international human rights standards, such as those to be found in CEDAW, might be the solution to some extent to address the intransigent nature of the resistance to women's sexual rights and consequently their overall well-being. And that is what impelled me into CEDAW at that time. Let's try this. And at the same time, in the mid-80s, was the end of the Decade of Women. How many of you know about the Decade of Women? Some of you maybe were not born there. But have you all heard about the Decade of Women? United Nations Decade of Women? You haven't. The Decade of Women was announced by the United Nations 75 to 85. And along with it, the United Nations also implemented several world conferences on women. 1985, which was the closing of the Decade of Women, was the third World Conference on Women held in Nairobi. Governments came up with outcomes and conclusions and platforms for action and so on. And people were beginning, so from Nairobi, the third World Conference on Women came what was called the forward-looking strategies. Forward-looking strategies. Everybody was excited about the forward-looking strategies. I didn't go to that conference, but I do know that the National Council of NCWO representatives, National Council of Women's Organizations in the and the Malaysian government went to that conference. The forward-looking strategies, Nairobi forward-looking strategies, talked about the need for institutions to address women's rights. So they introduced what was called national machineries for women. And national machineries for women were women's ministries. That was when even Malaysia came back and they said they didn't have a ministry, they had a department which was put into the Ministry of Social Welfare. a department called Power, with a deputy minister in charge. And people were saying that conditions of women, social, political, economic, legal, these conditions had to improve. That there was a lot of women were not enjoying good conditions. But CEDAW had come into existence, announced and accepted by governments in 1979, 1980. So by the mid-80s, CEDAW was also there. CEDAW was different because as compared to the forward-looking strategies. Forward-looking strategies were policies, development policies. But CEDAW was treaty, legally binding obligations, putting forth legally binding obligations. So CEDAW, in my view, put its finger squarely on the problem. CEDAW said it's not about improving the conditions. You can't improve the conditions of women, economic or social and political, unless you address the inequality of women and the discrimination that there is between for women. So that was very attractive for me when I read about this. And that is why I started trying to create a program that would do that globally. And of course, since I was here, I started, that's when International Women's Rights Action Watch started in the early 1900s, actually. There was some gestation period, and we started on my program in 1993 with the office based here in Kuala Lumpur. So that is the origins and how it all started. Then came the challenge of, I wanted to work with women so that women will take hold and take ownership of this program and push for their own equality. Otherwise, if government says, okay, we're going to do programs that will eradicate discrimination against you, if women had not bought into it, it's not going to work. So the program that I started was meant to build the capacity of women to make these demands of eliminating discrimination against them, and that governments had an obligation to fulfill the right to equality. So when I went out and I started the work in South Asia, based here in Malaysia, I started the work in South Asia, Bangladesh, Nepal, India, Sri Lanka, Pakistan. Most of their governments had India had not, Pakistan had not, but Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal had already, the government had ratified, the governments have to ratify legally and accept this treaty for them to take on obligations under it. So they had, at least these three countries had ratified, but none of the women's group, there were very vibrant women's groups in the early 1900s in all of these countries, but none of these groups knew what CEDAW was, that there was a treaty like that. Even the lawyers didn't know. Nor did they know that their government had ratified it and it had undertaken obligation. They didn't know. So we had to, one of the things that I had to do was introduce the CEDAW to them and say, this is a treaty, you can use it and you can work with it. And make demands because there's a legally binding, the government has legally binding obligations under this treaty. So it was a very challenging time going from country to country, doing workshops, orienting, introducing CEDAW to all of them. And women were very bright, smart women, lawyers, non-lawyers, political activists, working on the listened in the orientations and said, what is something, they didn't want something international. So what is something international at the UN do for us? How does it apply at the country level? And I still remember, the book will talk about that. The chapter 2 is about that. And I call it the agony and the ecstasy of teaching and preaching, CEDAW and equality. Women would challenge us, and women would say, hey, there's a woman who was raped in my village last week. What can your treaty do for her? So the issue is that CEDAW is not the domestically applicable law is not CEDAW. It's the local law. But CEDAW forces and compels the government to put in place good laws that can address the rape. Systems, good tribunals, good court systems that can adjudicate with justice and fairness. So it improves the system in the country to give justice to women. It cannot be used like it's a sword and go and cut somebody's head. So we had to make them understand that. In what way does CEDAW function? Then they said, but if the government doesn't fulfill its obligations, what can you do? You cannot prosecute your government. So it is the international naming and shaming a government that can take place, yeah? So this was the other thing we just said to them and tried to convince them. And finally, they were convinced. Or they would say, you're introducing another program to us. We can't take on more work. I'm working on health. That's what I want to focus on. So we said, it won't take you away from your work. It will enhance your activism for health, because it will give you standards of equality and non-discrimination. If you just work thematically in a context without understanding that there is inequality of women that is at the root cause of all this is happening to women or not happening to women, you won't go very far. So CEDAW gives you that conceptual underpinnings of where is your problem. Yeah, so this is a very exciting period of time introducing this. And after a few years of doing this, the women began to say, okay, we now understand what you're talking to us about, but we need skills, we need more knowledge. We need to understand how to apply this treaty, how to demand from our governments. So then we went into skills building, training, capacity building. So that is how the program developed from one phase to another phase. And then we brought women into the reporting cycle, which was taking place in Geneva with their shadow reports. We brought them into that focus. So at the end of the day, what did this introduction of CEDAW, in what way did it enhance the work, local work? We didn't want people to move away from their local thematic work, whatever they were doing. But how did it help them? As I said, it gave them an understanding of the root causes of what was happening to women. Otherwise, you just look at it as issues. This is the other thing. I have stopped using the term gender issue. It's not an issue that women are facing. Women are facing a deficit of rights, not just issues. So if you look at it, if women's labor force participation is low in this country, it's not a gender issue. There's a deficit of rights. Why are women's labor force participation not rising? What are the conditions which is preventing women from coming full force into the labor force? What deficit of rights is there? Stereotyping of women and not seeing them as equally capable of doing everything in upper managerial jobs, not having enough child support services, So that is a right that women have. And they are not just needs, they are rights. Otherwise, we just look at it as needs, yeah? So it introduced that conceptual clarity, the work introduced that conceptual clarity. Number two, it created better clarity on the meaning of equality. Even governments from very developed countries would come into the CEDAW review and say, of course, we have laws in our country that say women are equal. Even Malaysia's constitution says, Article 8 says all are equal. All persons in this country are equal. But it doesn't make us equal just because the constitution says so. And you have Article 8.2, which says discrimination is prohibited. But we still have discrimination in the country. Citizenship issue is one. So, in the text of CEDAW, Article 2 says there must be policy and law for equality and non-discrimination, which we have. But it also says the state has an obligation to fulfill the practical realization of the right to equality. That we don't have in our law. There is no compelling of the government to ensure that there is a practical realization of the right to equality. We don't have that. So that is where the challenge is. How do you, through law, ensure the practical realization of the principle of equality? We have to work. All of us together have to work on that. CEDAW introduces a concept of equality that is called substantive equality. And substantive equality is enabling, putting in enabling conditions, changing of a culture sometimes that is preventing women from moving forward. And I want to give you an example of where substantive equality is being applied. And I want two examples from Bangladesh. One is, this is many years ago, but it's true. There were girl children in the rural areas of Bangladesh were not going to school. Boys were going, but not girls. UNICEF had a discussion with the government of Bangladesh and said, let's see how we can help you to ensure that girls will go to school in the rural areas. And they then did a survey and found that there were no schools in the villages. The schools were in the urban centers, and it required a bit of moving back and forth. And parents didn't want their girls traveling up and down. Boys could go, girls couldn't go. So the solution to that, which UNICEF suggested, was they'd assist the government of Bangladesh to build rural schools, schools in the villages, so that girls can easily go to school. Girls still didn't come to school. And somebody wrote an article about this. It's a very nice title. It said, if you build them, will they come? So it is not just the infrastructure. It's more than that. So then they did another house-to-house survey and found that the teachers in the schools, there were no teachers in the villages. Teachers had to come from the urban centers. And the teachers were predominantly male, because it's the men who moved out and come to rural area to be teachers. Bangladesh is conservative culture. They didn't want their daughters interacting with male teachers. So they didn't send them. When they saw that the teachers were all men, they didn't send them to school. So Bangladesh government keeps saying, but we have equality. Our law says boys and girls have equal opportunity to go to school. So equal opportunity is there. Equal opportunity is not equality, because you may not have the access. We even built a school in the villages. We have done everything. We have provided, it's an equality measure already. So another policy was introduced, which said 60% of teachers in rural schools will be female teachers recruited, which means ensuring that you could recruit them, bring them into the village, provide them with safety, security, good accommodation. So many layers had to be put in place before your policy and law, which said boys and girls will have equal opportunity for education, becomes a practically realized. That is substantive equality. And that is what CEDAW says. Now, if you are looking at your SDG and the programs there, you have to examine. You may have a program, you may have an opportunity. How is it benefiting women? What are the other challenges that women are facing that is preventing them from making use of their opportunity? So it introduces the concept, therefore, of substantive equality and the notion of indirect discrimination. If you said girls cannot go to school, like the Taliban is doing in Afghanistan, that is direct discrimination, overt, deliberate, purposeful discrimination, with a purpose to discriminate. But if you didn't ensure that there will be equal number of female teachers at the school, but there are enough teachers, enough equipment, enough schools, it is indirect discrimination. You did not intend to discriminate against the girls, but you did not take into consideration the culture that is preventing girls from going to a school where they're just male teachers. That is indirect discrimination. So CEDAW introduces that concept of indirect discrimination. This is, you have to apply this notion or the concept of substantive equality and indirect discrimination in the SDG program. This is, I would say, what you have to do. That we don't have much time. Can we? I have a one pager. Yeah, you've already put it there. Okay. I want you to look at this about poverty eradication and see how it applies to your SDG program. First column is indicators for survival. I think those indicators most of us are doing in many parts of the world. We are working on this in terms of poverty eradication. And that is access to productive resources, engaging in productive activity, income generation or whatever, giving them opportunities to engage in that. Minimum income, at least they must get out of their work. Adequate food intake, basic housing and related amenities, basic health services. And that may comprise poverty eradication programs in many parts of the world. We are doing all of that, and that is survival. But that is survival. It's survival, it's hand to mouth. If there is a crisis, there was a storm and the wind blew off the roof of your house, the individual will collapse because they don't have their roof. Yeah. So the next level that you have to bring your individuals and women in particular, if you're looking at women, is bring them to a level of security, not just survival. And for security, they must have ownership of the productive resources and assets, availability of a safety net. So if a crisis, there is a social safety net that they can fall back on and it will redeem them, So availability of a social safety net, access to community resources, labor, material, so they can get that. Access to other social network like group membership, but the whole group will help you. So working together with the social and legislative rights to work to ownership of assets. So the law must support this ownership of assets that poor people must have awareness of legal rights given to the individuals, a forum to claim rights. Where can they claim rights if something is going wrong? Political and social contacts that they have that they can go to. You see, I know a woman here in PG low-cost housing where she has 6 children, husband went gone to jail, she is informal sector, she cannot pay the maintenance of the apartment. You know, it's a low-cost apartment, but she has to pay monthly maintenance. She cannot. So she let it go, and it has come up to, she owes the apartment 3,000 ringgit. Is happening right now. The management of the apartment has cut off her water supply. She's living on the 9th floor, 6 children. So she has to carry water from the ground level pipe up 9 flights. She called me. She says, can you help me? I don't know what to do. I don't know who is the political contact that I can put her in touch with that can somehow help her or speak to the management of the, even I don't have that contact to help her, although I do not need such help. So there must be some political contacts that can pull people out of that crisis. Freedom from risk of violence gives them a sense of security. They have to move. And then we had the third level that they must move towards is, that's a long-term agenda. It won't happen overnight. Autonomy. The individuals must have autonomy. Gosh, this is shining like too much. This building, yes, I'm going to finish. Too much, too bright. Painful for the eyes. And see now this is shining. They must be mobile. Can you switch off these lights? Is it possible? They must have mobility to move wherever they want to move, able to decide on important issues for self, for family members, and the community. Decision-making capacity. They must have control over income, assets, example, use, buy, sell. They must have that control. And women, we're talking about women in particular. Control over own labor and time, example, able to decide in what activities one is going to spend one's time and labor, including for personal leisure. I want to tell you an example. In Bangladesh, when I did some training, village women, we asked them indicators of this autonomy to tell us. And they said, one of them, they gave us many indicators. They said, where a woman in the village is able to go out of her house, just to go and chat with her neighbor, other than going out of the house to fetch water or firewood or go to the market. It's an indicator of empowerment that she could decide to go and chat with her neighbor. So that is leisure, personal leisure, control over her time for personal leisure, sexual and reproductive decision-making for self, representing women and the community in decision-making bodies. If there is a community level decision-making body, can she be a representative there? Access to a wide range of occupations. So then she has options for work. Able to act as social agent for self without intermediary. Example, access to health services, public goods and services, and make a police report. This is also more rural, more Bangladesh type of countries where even to make a police report, a woman cannot go and do it on her own. Her husband must be. Police will say, bring your husband. Yeah. So that should not be there. Able to make claims for self from the family and capacity to claim legal rights, participation in public protests and political campaigns, non-existence of harmful abuse or discriminatory practices in the family, equal value with male members of the family. She has that. Have an identity outside the home of the family. She has an identity. She's a member of a committee or something, you know, another identity. I don't know what the next one is.
Role of the community.
Role, yeah, it's a role, I'm sorry, role of the community or society in appreciating autonomy of it. So the community must appreciate that she has this autonomy. If the community doesn't appreciate it, she'll face a lot of hostility from the community and harassment. So eventually, women, that's good, it's finished. Eventually, women must be able to move into that position of autonomy. But as I said, that is, yeah, advocate for it, work on it, and it will take time. It won't happen it won't happen overnight. So even in our own SDG 5, goal 5, this is the transition that has to take place from survival to security to autonomy, and autonomy comes in much later. It won't happen immediately. With a lot of community level support. So there must be education of the community for this. Article 5 of CEDAW, all of this is in CEDAW. Article 5 of CEDAW says this, that the culture and tradition of the community must change, appreciating the equality. And for us, we need to start this program. It's not just in goal 5, your goal on education. Schools must start indoctrinating on this as well. Poverty eradication should follow this. So every goal of SDG must look to see how you can, it has a role in transitioning, transforming society as well as women, a level of autonomy. So I will stop here and see if how the rest of the program will go. But all I'm saying is, this is what IWRAW Asia Pacific's program is about, and I've tried. I mean, but I thought I would speak about, especially if you want to see how it relates to SDGs. But at the end of the day, that is what we would like to see happening. Yeah.
Thank you, Shanthi. Yes, I was encouraged you to write down your reflections and the questions. And after Dr. Su and Dr. Tan's sections, we can open for discussion. With people experience and have the real stories to share, the best way to learn is really through interaction. All right. Okay, so now I hand over to Dr. Kim. Dr. Kim,
So I need to.
and then after that, you can pass to Dr. Su directly.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Dr. Anderson, friends, Ms. Shanthi, thank you very much for the sharing. I've learned a lot through listening to your account and also the book, which I hope to share with friends here. Maybe I'll just take about 7 to 10 minutes to share the gist of what the book tells about, what it reflects on, and maybe try to suggest some key highlights, and then maybe some ideas and things for us to think about as we go forward in our work. So I'd just like to highlight 4 things. Number 1 is on the idea of narrative. Number 2, on the organization that Ms. Shanthi has established and also maintained, IWRAW or IWRAW. Some of the key things that I think are important for us to be cognizant of. And last of all, maybe just to suggest some stakes. Why is this important? Why are we discussing this? Why is it important for us here today? And maybe some of the trends moving forward. So first of all, I want to say that as with all narratives, just to introduce, I think Ms. Shanthi hasn't mentioned this. She has a master's in gender and development from Sussex University, but she did her first degree in English literature, I believe.
First degree.
Correct, yes. The idea of storytelling and narrative, number 1, is very powerful. It allows us to as they say, very clichely, speaking truth to power. Words, language, and vocabulary allows us to make sense of the world and to articulate our ideas and our opposition towards injustices, for example. Her book is an example of narrative. It tells us about her journey, her friends, her family, her trials and tribulations in the 11 years, I believe, and more, of course, but 11 years particularly before her then participation in the committee on CEDAW. So the idea of narrative is very important. So when I read this book, and I think she has shared with me also just now, it's not meant to be a theoretical or philosophical work. No one will read it. It's not meant to be Plato or Aristotle, but it's meant to be a story of how people come together, struggle to achieve certain ideals. So that's number one. Number two, just to introduce briefly for maybe some of us who have not had the time to read about the International Women's Rights Action Watch Asia Pacific yet. Number one of the things that it's known for and it strives to do is to connect the international to the local. And I think in that sense, it's not very much different from what we are doing today. As Ms. Shanthi mentioned, using CEDAW as a window to look at the world, to identify gender issues, problems confronted by women, by children, by family, for example. So it's meant to connect the international to the local, and yet at the same time, engage the international through the local experience and cases. That's number one. Number two is, I think this is a very valuable contribution is in terms of conceptual analysis. And Ms. Shanthi has also mentioned how, and I believe, if I can say this, you did not come with a certain principle in the beginning. It's through trial and error. So we have an idea, the organization has an idea, but it is constantly being developed and built as they encounter more problems and more issues and more cases on the ground. So they've come up with a very good principle, which is substantive equality, consisting of equality of opportunity, equality of access, and equality of results. These are the three things that are very important. In relation to substantive equality, it's also the framework of equality and non-discrimination. And I think this is also very important. So maybe some of us, when we read the book, we can look out for these concepts later. So in terms of the contribution as a connection between the international and local, it also adds on and helps us by providing us a conceptual framework to work with. And of course, the other things that the organization has been active and has been promoting is in terms of policy reform, law reform, carrying out capacity building workshops and programs, mobilizing grassroots from, I believe, South America to South Asia to East Asia to Southeast Asia and back. So those are very, very important things in my opinion. Just two more things under, I feel, what is important for this organization or what can be associated with them is in terms of the events, world events that have also gone in tandem with their development. Number one, I think she has mentioned is the Decade of Women from 1975 to 1985. Of course, and then you have the Vienna Conference, and then you have the Fourth Women's Conference in Beijing, and then in 95, so 93, 95, 94, I believe is the Conference on Development, Population and Development, which 94, correct. Yeah, so these are the events that are very important in informing their development and also work. They have two flagship programs. Number one is the facilitating fulfillment of state obligations. That is to make sure that principles of the Treaty of CEDAW are given attention in national policy making and policies. And the other one is global to local program. And I believe this was one of the reasons why Shanthi wanted to establish this organization, was to bring in women's voices from the civil society into the review process, because she was not satisfied that at that time only international activists was only involved in this review process. So these are the things that I think are important and we can associate to the organization. Two more points I'd just like to share and cover. So what are the key themes of this narrative or this story or the work that they have done? What is important? Number one, I feel, and this has been expressed many times over, when it comes to issues like this, ground realities are important,
Yeah.
lived experiences are important. Connecting the private to the public and connecting the public to the private. Women's issues are not family issues. Women's issues are public issues. So these are the things that are important. Number two, of course, again, the concept of substantive equality, the three equalities, access, opportunity, and results. But also one more thing I'd like to share here, and this runs in the book also, is the idea of intersectionality. Gender issues are also at the same time health issues, which are also at the same time economic issues. And I think Ms. Shanthi has illustrated this very nicely in the case of the Bangladesh school, where political reasons intertwined with gender issues, gender reasons, she doesn't use issues, gender factors, and also economic factors. These are all interrelated. So intersectionality, multi-dimensionality is important. Using a rights-based approach is also important. Other these key themes I want to also share, and I think this is important for our work today, is what are the factors or ingredients that make a successful organization? And I think this was shared in one of the chapters also. I think this is a very important chapter.
Yeah.
Number one, I think, is political vision and clarity. I think she has from the very beginning, although they've built on it and developed it from the beginning, but from the inception, I think there must be some form of clarity. Where do we come from? Where are we going? And how do we get there? And I think this pervades the book and also her account. Number two, of course, you need good leadership, good members, without a core of leadership. And I think she shared the many individuals that were instrumental in making this a success, the organization a success, are many. Two more that are important. Number three, of course, is partnership. Activism is a partnership, whether with governments, with local groups, or with NGOs or any other group. And last of all, the most important, I feel, is stamina. I think for one to be able to, and we see this every day in our organization, Ms. Shanthi, if I can share with you, my colleagues here, they don't have night and day, I believe. So they've blurred the demarcation between night and day. Sometimes I get messages in my WhatsApp, is this in the morning or is this at night? But they are always working. So in that sense, I think stamina is very important. And Ms. Shanthi herself has showed us in her 11 years and 20 over years, through the challenges, the problems, the political opposition towards it. I think these are all important. Okay, so lastly, what are the things that we can think about in discussing the topic that we have today? Number one, I think we should think more about inequality, particularly on women. Number two, we should also take note of or think of gender as a social construct shaped by institutions, culture, religion, policy, law, ideologies. We should think about power, how power affects us, affect women, and also our families. The need for theory and action, and this goes back to one of the key ingredients of a successful organization, not merely talking about theories, but implementing these theories. Action and reflection are important. Social analysis and policy making is also interrelated and important. And last of all, I would like to say is that I think culture is also very important. In this book, Ms. Shanthi shared about changing value systems. I think value systems are important. No matter what kind of constitution or policy or law you put in place, if there is no reformation of culture, then many of the policies will just remain as paper and words. And of course, last of all, I think today what we need, and in relation to our work, I think we need more women, and we need more younger people in our field today. And so again, I will end with this. I think this book is a very, very valuable contribution. And I am privileged and grateful to be able to read it. And I hope that many of us will have the time and be able to read through the book and share the many experiences or learn from the many experiences of the work that Ms. Shanthi has done. So with that, I end. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, and I hope, as we say, many more success and also years to come
Yeah.
in our work and continue inspiring more people. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Shanthi, Dr. Ken. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me here. It is such an honor, actually, to be able to sit beside you and then, talking about CEDAW and all of that. I had my master in gender studies, so CEDAW is one of the must-known thing for a master student. And doing it in Kanita and having Prof. Rashida as my supervisor and making it even more compulsory that I must know. But obviously, I don't know enough because I learned so much from the presentation and from Dr. Ken's really, really good summary and also the reflections of the book. So again, thank you so much. So my role here is really to, again, reflect on the findings that we've got from APPGM SDG. I think that Shanthi's book and also Dr. Ken's summaries and also analysis reflection actually put a framework to the work that we have done and also the findings that we have collected over 85 parliamentary constituencies so far. Just to maybe give a little bit of the journey of APPGM SDG to all of you that's new and also to Shanthi as well, is that from the very beginning, we don't really see a lot of agenda in our findings. I do have to admit, we don't really see it because we saw it as a given thing. So when we talk about, when we go to the ground, when we go and do discussion, we always thought that, if we have a focus group discussion, naturally men and women will come because we're talking about half population here. There's no way that women wouldn't show up, but that's the case. We don't see women actually came up from our focus group discussion. They did not come. Even if they do, they sit very far away at the corner of the room, not wanting to join us. I got this from Omna. Omna was here just now. I got this from Omna from the very beginning. Look, for women, we may need to actually give them put them into a small group or ask them to come out and separate group, and then we discuss so that they can have a safer space, that they can have ample time to discuss. Otherwise, it will always be the men that will be on the front and talking about all the issues, thinking that that's actually related to women. I did not really appreciate or rather understand the nuance of it until I went for my first visit to SIG in Kedah. One of the particular site that we went to is to actually discuss with the rubber tapper in Kedah, and then we had it in Surau. So the thing about Surau is that you have all the men sitting in front and then you have all the women sitting at the far corner of it. So back then I was just a liaison officer. So my job is really to listen. Fortunately for me, I have Alizan and I have Dr. Zainal to be conducting all the interview, all the focus group discussion. But then my job is really to just keep on writing and then recording and make sure that everything is in place, and that's what I do. And then when I saw that there are lots of women actually sitting at the far end of the surau behind it, then I asked them, why don't you all come around and say, no. In surau, women will have to be sitting at the back. So, okay, then I pull my chair and then I sit with them and then I discuss with them. And then I found out that there are a lot of issues that women are discussing at the back of the surau is actually very different from the men that's actually discussing the issue at the front. So the men at the front will be talking about how the rubber price has dropped, so it's so dirt cheap, and then how the tradings are so unfair and etc. But the women's they're actually talking about now it's COVID, we don't have food on the table, our children cannot go to school. They need to go to the school to get the homework for the children to come back and work, and then they're talking about connectivity. They don't have internet at the kampong, they cannot go to school, so etc. So the dimension of the issues are very different when we're talking about men and women. Fast forward to 2022, I made it a point that our colleagues will make sure that when we go to the ground, they always make sure to ask the questions of where are the women. So we started to have more and more women like single mothers. When we talk about talking about warga emas, we talk about women and etc. But that again, I think there's a limitations with our findings, because when we talk about women, we are only talking about single mothers. It's as though that, you know, women issues are so exclusive that it's only talking about social issues and talking about just single mothers issues. And then in 2022, there was only once that IWRAW, when the YB actually said that, you know what, we know a group of single fathers. I was like, what? You know, a group of single fathers? Yeah, we know a single. Then I said, okay, we need to discuss with them. We must go. So we made a point to actually talk to the single fathers, and I have met so many single mothers. I already have like a set of questions that I can ask so easily with single mothers. So I went there thinking that, okay, let's discuss. But I realized that all the questions that I have for single mothers doesn't apply for single father at all. The dimensions of their problems are so different. So they talk about, if you're talking about JKM, you're complaining about JKM not giving the welfare to the single mothers. What about us single fathers? We can't even go to the office to ask for it. And for the fact that they have been raised in such a gendered kind of a situation where the men will always, where the women will always be the caregiver. Now they're suddenly given a situation where they have to take care of the children. They don't know what to do. So they're worried that the children, if they neglect them, they will go into drugs issues, because IWRAW have a lot of very serious with drug issues. And then they're worried that the children are not coming back at night. They worried that what the children is going to eat. They don't know how to cook. The clothing, if they have daughters, and if they have periods, menstruations, what is it that they're supposed to do? How is it that they can give all this advice, you know, and the changing of the body, for example. And if they don't have any sisters at home, or they don't have a mother that they can fall back on to ask for advice, then what can they do? So they are very helpless in that sense, and they can't be going out and ask, look, my daughter's body is changing. What am I going to do? You know, when is it that, you know, they're supposed to wear bra, or no, they have menstruation? What is it that we can do about it? So this kind of a question is not the questions that they can ask. I think it comes back to all the, again, the notions about culture and also value in all of this locality, whether it's in Kampong or whether it is in the Bandar. So it's so dynamic and so different. So one of the things about APPGM SDG, I think a lot of the researchers here can actually agree with me, is that you can see the nuances of all of this dynamic and complexity of women and men. It's not really so much about men and women, again, like what Shanthi has said, that it's about equality. Everybody is equal, you get equal pay. It's not really so much about that. If the women cannot really go out to work and they have to take care of the children. And when, one of the things when we talk about single mothers is that JKM don't give any welfare for single mothers, thinking that, you know what, they can go out and work, they are capable. But what if we are talking about single mothers who are also the elderly in the family? They came, the husband died, they left alone, and then the children got married, the children got divorced. Give them the grandchildren to take care. What about these so-called single mothers? They are the ones who are vulnerable. I have one participant who is single mother came to me about 70-ish years old. He said that I kena bela cucu saya. So I kena buat nasi lemak. I mean, they have to make nasi lemak every morning. They bungkus and then they sell. My grandchildren have to help me before she can go to school. So these are, then she asked me, how long am I supposed to do this? How long am I supposed to continue selling all of this to actually to take care of my grandchild when my children are not taking care of them? So these are the, the most recent visit is to Kuala Kangsar, when the DO say that, you know what's all the single mothers supposed to be capable. I say, no, not all of them. You have to understand that there are differences in that way. So again, it's the local understanding and awareness of this gender dimension of it. I think, and another, and also with APPGM, we know that we met with fishers who are women. We always see fishermen, but we have fisher women. We have farmers, estates workers who are working in what do you call that, palm oil estates, rubber estates. We have women tapper. what about them? Then we have farmers. We think that paddy farmers will always be men. No, that's not the case. We do have paddy women farmers who work really hard. Then one of the things that the microcredits, Malaysian microcredit didn't work is precisely because they did not take into considerations of the women farmers, the machinery. They think that if they give the machinery to the farmers, they can work. But what about the women if the machine is too heavy for them? So these are the nuances of these gender dimensions of the findings that often we collect them, but we haven't come to the point that we really analyze and contextualize the findings that we have got. So I just have 2 more minutes. I think I would make another reflection is that the locality, the culture, the value of it is actually very interesting, but also there are the hindrances and challenges. I was looking back at the Shanti's table that showed just now to see like where are the women at the moment. I think that we are still at the point of we still haven't reached the security when we're talking about gender. There are a lot of things that we don't have access to, like the violence issues. If you're talking about domestic violence to MPKK, who are women, pengerusi who are women, they will tell you that, oh, if that is the case, we'll go to the house, we'll take the women out, we'll go to the police station, we'll make the police go and make the police report, we'll take her to the masjid, and then they're going to get advice if that's not happen. Or we need shelter. They say that we need the shelter in here because here we don't have shelter, we have domestic violence victims, we cannot do anything about it. What is supposed to do? They came to ask us about it. But if you're talking to the MPKK in pengerusi who are men, if we have domestic violence, how? Ini pasal keluarga. We cannot interfere. Full stop. And then so then you raise the question of what do we do now? Do we need a lot of pengerusi who are women? Do we need to have men and women in the MPKK? Is that even possible? Can we do that? So for those places which is so unfortunate that you have men as the pengerusi in the MPKK, does that mean that they're being so helpless that they cannot access? Even though we do have mechanism, we do have something to help these victims and etc., but they cannot access to it precisely because the MPKK is the man, or the penghulu is the man, and they cannot get signed off with JKM, for example. These are the issues that always crop up in our findings. Another thing is that I think it's also the reflection of me as a women researcher. So I don't know about others researchers, but for a women researcher, there's always the issues of accessing the communities. So I think that my first experience is in Sikh. When I talk to the men, when the Malay men, they will always look to the ground. I have to like, yes, hello YB, even the YB Tamizi also will be like looking at the ground, not even having an eye contact with me. So they hear that, okay, this is a religion thing, this is the Malay thing. And then to build the rapport with the men, because as I say, majority of them are men, to build the rapport with the men, there's a gap. But when I see my colleagues like Tanaraj, like Dr. Ken, when they go into it, I can see that the click will happen very fast if I was the one who is going to conduct it. Last time in 2021, I have Dr. Zaina, I have Alizan to do that preaching. So I was just behind, keep on writing, and just and write. And they are the one who's doing all this, we call it the act, right? Yeah. 30 seconds. So I think the cultural, the value is still a very much of a hindrances that needs to be addressed before we even go forward to talk about institutionalization of it, and also the substantive equality of it. These are the things that the women are actually facing on the ground, and that's what the APPG and SDG findings show. I think we need, for the researcher, we do need to come to a point that we critically assess the findings that we have got, and also reflect on the ground of how is it that we deal with the participants and the office or whoever it is, the stakeholders. Right, very fast. Thank you.